Author and Vietnam veteran Dennis Lane, next on City Corner. Hi, I'm Sarah Thompson, and welcome to City Corner. Today, I'm joined by Dennis Lane. He is an author, and he's also a Vietnam veteran, and I appreciate you being here. We are here today, the day after the general election, and what really stays on my mind is talking about this country, obviously, and what it means to serve this country. And so to kind of get things started, your book is obviously based on your experiences in Vietnam. What does that mean? What was that like to really put your life in the line of jeopardy for your country? What does it mean to be a veteran?
Well, truthfully, when I went there, I was so young. I don't think you fully understand the full consequences about what you're going to be going through and the implications and the kinds of things that you're going to see. And it's only in retrospect. I think that when you're very young and vulnerable and naive, you just kind of do things without thinking. And then I think it's a combination of that, and when you're there, things happen so quickly that you can't process them, and it takes years to really think things through and to process them fully.
Were you drafted?
Yeah, I was drafted.
So how old were you when you went over?
I was I was 20, and so I went over there, and I went to Fort Leonard Wood, and then I went on to Fort Sill, Oklahoma, and with the artillery, and then I served with a unit in Vietnam for 14 and a half months. And when we arrived there, we were attached to the 101st Airborne, and so that was it was eye-opening, to say the least.
What did your life? You had been in St. Louis up to that point. You're from St. Louis, right? So here you are going from St. Louis. You go through your training, and you sort of. Here you are, stepping foot right down in Vietnam with a war going on. What goes through your mind at 20 years old?
Well, I think number one, you're frightened and you don't know what lies ahead. And I think, as odd as it may sound, it's a relief when you finally get to your unit, because at least you know where you're going to be and who you're going to be with. And then you have to figure out how you're going to fit in, because it's very important how you fit in with the rest of the men, and I don't know, even the bunker you're going to sleep in and who you're going to share it with. So I think, quite frankly, when you're really young, you're more concerned about that than everything else when you initially get there. And then everything changes after a while.
Yeah, and changes daily. I will say that, connected with your book, you have a wonderful website set up with these photos that you took, and they're really, beautiful, clear photos. And there's something you were going to say behind these photos. You didn't take them the first day.
No, I didn't take any pictures the first day. That particular, outpost I'd like to speak. I had my first night in guard duty when I first got into Vietnam, and it was, I was assigned on guard duty, and I was at the bottom of the hill, and we had incoming rounds coming in. This is funny, and I never lived it down. It's not a war story. And so I was told to comb the hill. So I started combing the hill, but about every other time I'd go up too far. And so I was hitting the outposts at the top, and they were calling and calling and calling, trying to get me to stop. And of course, I was so frightened, I did not stop, and I know that doesn't sound possible, until the barrel of the M50 machine gun was red hot. It was molten hot. And then I stopped, I answered the phone, and then of course I can't repeat what they said to me. And then the next day I was brought up to in front of everyone. I was ridiculed, of course, and I never lived it down. No, but it's okay, because we all made mistakes like that when we first got there. So anyway, that was my big mistake that to this day when I see the men in my unit that they would never let me live down. So
And I think the older you get too, I mean, when I look at those photos, you're quite young. You're really young. The older I get, I mean, I remember, as a child when learning about Vietnam, in school and history classes, it just seems so far off. And the older I've become, that I got and became an adult and a parent, and now I look at these soldiers and they're so young. Are you even aware when you were there, sort of what you were really fighting for? What's going on with the broader? I mean, what are you? Is your day-to-day more about fulfilling just the task of what you're directed to do?
Well, one of the things that a lot of people don't remember and are unaware, that Vietnam, while we were there, was not called a war. It was called a police action. So we never really got the kind of respect and it was a war, and that, say, the Korean War, World War II, et cetera, and they were labeled as war. And it wasn't until later, after Vietnam was over, that we finally labeled it as a war. And returning, of course, was an experience all unto itself, because there was no support on campus or from the VA like there is today, which fortunately. But so it complicated your life a great deal.
Well, let's go back to some of these photos, because I was saying, I mean, your 35 millimeter photos are, I mean, they're clear and they're sharp, and I think just really give you sort of a feeling of what that was like for you. As we look through these, I mean, is it very vivid? Do you remember all of your...
Sure. Yeah, I mean, the guy on the right side, Robert E. Ritchie, and I've tried to locate him several times. He took my place when I left Vietnam, and the guy on the left was Kennedy, and he was the first sergeant's driver, and I can't remember the first sergeant's name right now. But anyway, so I distinctly remember the three of them.
Do you feel like within a unit, as we look through some of these photos, I mean, there's people from all different backgrounds, races, ethnicities. I mean, did you feel, I noticed one of the comments you make on the website is that despite coming from, especially at a time when this is during civil rights era and segregation, that by having a common enemy, did that bring people together or not? Or how did that work with those racial dynamics?
Yeah, it brought people together in some ways. It forced us to come together. Not necessarily, and it was this unwritten rule that we knew that we needed each other. And that's me, by the way, on the right, and Johnny Noblin. And our vehicle, were sent ahead to bring back somebody so they could go home to the United States. And we were sent through the Anke Pass, et cetera, and some other places. And they put our vehicle down, and because I was kind of a smart aleck, and they kind of did it on purpose to me, and I kind of deserved it. And so we got back a day late, but we got him so he could fly home back to the United States.
To get him back. And it's amazing when you think about it that each action that you take is putting your life at risk to get another soldier back to an airstrip to get home, that you might not come back from that even. Let's go ahead and resume with some of the photos that we have from your time there. And I think, again, this is, we pulled these from what's on your website, so let's take a look. Who's this?
I think his name was Young, and I don't remember where he was from, but he was, filling, that was for the water for his gun section, that they'd fill it up, and that's what we drank water out of, and shaved and whatever.
How's your notion of time? Do you think about, is your day, these 24 hours, it changes. You're obviously, here you are in Vietnam, this is nothing like morning, dinner, this, and I mean, you're still following those things, but...
Yeah, we used to say every day was like a year.
Yeah.
And this is one of my favorite pictures, and they look very happy because they were on their way to the house in Nha Trang. Sonny, that's all I want to say about that.
We'll leave it at quote house. We'll leave it at what that means.
Well, yes, we'll just leave it at that.
Let's see what we have.
And that was one of the guys by the book Barker, who was a shake and bake officer. He was a 90-day wonder and was only 20. And they were some of the young officers like that were some of the most difficult. We had one officer who was from West Point. He was a true Christian gentleman and treated us all very well. And it was the difference between a shake and bake officer and a West Point graduate was unbelievable.
Wow.
It was unmistakable.
I thought what was interesting when I saw some of the photos, and I'm not sure if it's going to come up, was when you have an image of the dining room. It's where you sort of did a dining room. I don't know what you necessarily called it. And just even with the locals who worked there, how was that sort of dynamic of employing the Army?
And
the
I want to
unit
be
sort of
very
like,
clear about that. That only happened I was there 14 and a half months.
Okay.
Most people were there for 12 months. And we didn't have a dining room or anything. We had a tent until and this was base camp, until about 2.5 months before I left. This was something altogether new, so we'd never had it before. And yes, they hired some Vietnamese, and we had a very good relationship with a lot of them. And it was unfortunate in that you didn't know who always you could trust or not. But we had great relationships with a lot of them.
Another image I wanted to show is it's a black and white photo you have of, again, someone in your unit with the Confederate flag in the back. And I think, you brought an interesting point, was here you are, people from all parts of the country together from completely different backgrounds. This is 1969. And how did everyone get along? If white, black, who had never coexisted before necessarily, how did that work when you're in such a small space and also at war?
Well, the truth is, we had a very high tolerance because the fact that we knew that, okay, this is what you believed, and we kind of just let everything go. For example, our first sergeant was probably one of the most prejudiced men I've ever served under, but everyone knew when it came to his job and to combat, he was the best. And racial prejudice, there had nothing to do when he was on call. Now, he had a lot of other issues, so it was that dynamic you were always dealing with, and I think in particular, the African American community and the Hispanic community were aware of that more than the white community. And so I don't know, but that's kind of the way we operated.
Well, we're going to have to take a quick break, but when we come back, we're going to talk about what you're seeing right before you. This is the title of Dennis's book, and it's quite interesting. It's about a graffiti wall that was at his unit. And we're going to get into the details of the novel, which is fiction, but how it's based on his experiences. So again, the information's there for you on your screen. But please don't go anywhere. We're going to have more with Dennis Lane after we return from this break.
When you throw away money on wasted electricity, you're throwing away everything you could have bought with it. Saving energy saves you money. Learn more at EnergySavers.gov.
G morning, sunshine. Wakey, wakey. Text me. Are your parents home later? We can hang. LUV, love you. JK. Holla back. Holla back. Holla back. Are you with your friends? That's lame. We're in a huge fight right now. XO. What'd you dream about? Something I did. Are you on your way to the mall? I'm lonely. Nude pics. Send me some. Text me.
Hi, I'm Sarah Thompson, and welcome back to City Corner. Today, my guest is Dennis Lane. He is an author. He's also a Vietnam veteran, and that kind of now segues into the first segment of the show. We really talked a lot about your time in Vietnam, and now I want to get to the book. the book that we have. So the Bitch Wall is what it's called. It definitely grabs attention, but there's a subtitle to that, and the Vietnam Wailing Wall. What's this about? What's the book about?
The book is about, revolves around an actual wall in a bunker in Vietnam, where the men in my unit, one night, spontaneously, we decided to paint a wall white and started writing graffiti on it. And the title on the wall was Fags Trip on the Wall, and then right underneath that, relieve your inner tensions right on the wall. Now, but what most people don't know is fags is short for field artillery guys. So that was our, so when you look, and so it has a double entendre.
So when you see it, it's not how people today might imply it derogatory.
Yeah, but we didn't care anyway. So anyway, and so what happened is we started writing graffiti on it, and it was a total joke. And within a couple weeks, the wall was no longer a joke, and because we started writing and sharing stuff on the wall at when no one is around, and things that probably we would have never shared with each other. And at night, we'd get high and we'd drink a few beers and talk about what it meant. And so it became, within a very short period of time, the manifestation of who we were. And it was so important that we used to all talk about how we'd love to take it home with us, and of course we couldn't. And so what happened was I copied down all of the thoughts of the wall the day before I left for Vietnam, and knowing that I would write something around that. But it was after I was in the Jesuits that I realized that it's like the Wailing Wall in Jerusalem. And I tell people that I believe that what these 18 to 22-year-old men wrote on this wall is very transparent. They were bearing their souls for everyone to see, is every bit as holy as these prayer scrolls that people go to put.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and now when I say that, then people, I think it helps them to put it in perspective. But you have to understand these are very frightened young men who don't know what the next hour is going to bring.
And we're looking at one of them, and I think that's a poignant comment, just how raw really it is, the inner, this is what you're thinking. So I mean, you have everything here from. So I've developed a new philosophy: dread only one day at a time.
Yeah, and of course, and then this is of course from Ecclesiastes, from the Bible, and of which the song, I can't even think who the group is right now, but a time for giving birth, etc., a time for dying. But anyway, it's also was based on a song was based on that.
It's interesting how just a wall became, or a graffiti wall, became what is it? Just becomes an outlet. So happiness is a warm gun.
That has a double entendre meaning, and that's right out of a Beatles song. And that's all I'm going to say.
I know, before my time, I would ask you to explain it, but you just said
sure, yeah.
So let's look at,
okay. Let the splash of the color of the wall penetrate the depth of your eyes, and then you will realize you're on a trip and having a ball. And, because, drugs were readily available, and it was, you could get anything you wanted. And so I'd like to say that the men who were on the big bases had a very similar experience to the stateside, because they had nightclubs and everything. But the men like us who were in the field, the experience, it wasn't the same experience. And it isn't like that we were brave or anything. It just so happened the luck of the draw and what you got called to do and what you got confronted with. But so I never cease to be amazed at how the difference in the experiences, because most people don't realize that something like nearly 95%, 94% of the troops that were in Vietnam were support troops. Very few were actually those, like the infantry and artillery, were actually out there in the field at all. So there was just a different kind of experience.
Why did you choose to make your book, write it as a novel, as fiction, versus a nonfiction book?
Oh, sure. There are four main characters, and each one of these characters represent a different kind of perspective and worldview. And for me, the most important part of the novel and what differentiates it from other war novels, it's more about the internal struggle and how men, two men of faith, a Christian and a Jew, and two atheists, a regnant macho guy and a very intellectual guy from Stanford, and yeah, I had to put that in. Yeah, I had to put that in, and so and how they each come to terms with the dignity of their beliefs. Not saying in any way that one is better than the other. It simply states this is how they are confronted with their death and how they come to terms with it. And so, obviously, you can't. While the incidents are basically all true, and 98% of them happened in my unit, a couple of them I added from other units, but you can't write a book. And to me, this was the most important part. And not only is it relevant to those men at war, but it's relevant to everyone because, quite frankly, we all have to come to terms with it. And one of the most important things for me that I learned is it sets you free from that fear of death. It really does. And at the risk of sounding, pedantic, but so in some ways it was a gift.
I want to go back to, we were just looking at some images of the one about the old soldiers never die, the young
Yeah,
ones.
oh yeah.
Dude, that really struck me when I saw that, because I think when the fear of like a draft, if this were to happen again, and how young, 18, and what does this mean? Is this referring to the young ones die out of inexperience, or just by, as you mentioned, fate, luck? What does this really mean?
That's the first graffiti that appears in the book, and that actually is a graffiti I was writing along the night before I left for Vietnam with my good friend Calvin Chandler and Sheila O'Brien, and all of a sudden this graffiti was lit up on a construction fence, and Sheila began crying, and my friend Calvin, of course, was speechless and didn't know what to say. And so it was the first war graffiti I saw, but it was actually right here in St. Louis. And what I'm hoping and what I've been working on is that that my play potentially may end up being a musical, and this would be the first song. And I have a very good friend of mine, and I don't know if I'm at liberty, but I'm going to say it anyway, Ken McKenna, who's working on this song. And if it does go to Broadway, it would probably be a song that would be reprised throughout, because it's a general theme, and throughout the play. So I'm having more fun now than I've ever had in my whole life.
No, I think it's great to be able to take something, an experience like this, and to try to have other people understand it and relate to it in different ways, and I think that so far, obviously with the book and whatever, it goes in different reiterations of it, it does that. You just mentioned something about not being sort of afraid to die after going through this. What did you notice as your sense of fear, how it changed from, of course this is a long time ago, but when you were 20, your notion of fear there, and now when you think about fear, is it something that, how do you define it? How do you think of it? How do you experience it?
Well, I think that because, and this is my interpretation, that we were forced to face our death, and especially in certain situations, in the climax of the book in particular, where it was inescapable. You had to look at that, and so once you do that, you're permanently changed. And I always say that I felt like I lived my life backwards, because I learned to face something that most people don't have to face into their 70s and 80s, and yet I had to face that, but all of us did, not just me. And so it changes everything. It and it's kind of like one of the things that's one of the graffiti on the wall is, what are they going to do? Send me to Vietnam?
Yes,
I mean,
I saw that one,
yeah. You know, it's it. You know, this is as bad as it gets, and so forget about it. You know, and so it was truly a different kind of war.
And, you know, we don't talk about this often because we've sort of had the luxury of not having to have a draft. But, you know, does that scare you when you think about that? I mean, having been drafted yourself, if that were to be anything, I would hope not and pray that it wouldn't be. But how do you think about the draft?
As far as then or now?
Now, if that were to happen.
Oh, I find that very complicated because when I was in, it was just primarily, well, it was all men. And now there's an opportunity for both men and women. So what does that imply? That both men and women will be drafted, you know, at 18? So I have misgivings about it. And I don't really have an answer.
Yeah, just a thought. I mean, it's not something that you can probably, I think, have a short answer for. What do you hope that, in writing this, it's not to say that everything that we do or sometimes in a book that, you know, that there had to be some sort of subversive messaging that you were trying to get across, but when ultimately people read this, they buy this, they read it, what is it that you want them to take away from it?
Well, I want them, of course, to be able to get inside the souls of those four men. And I know that the people who've read it and who've come to me and we've spoken have told me that the book did that in a very balanced way, which is very important. But I hope that they realize that they understand what we went through. And although it's a very naive dream in my proposal that I'm presenting to a potential producer next week. One of the things, I don't know if you know, but Lin-Manuel Miranda, the first row of their production of Hamilton was $10 seats, and they were all very inexpensive because they were for people who couldn't afford it. And so my dream is that on opening night, that the men from my unit would be invited to come and be sitting in the front row, and people would be unaware of that, of course, and that once the play is acknowledged, then they'd be asked to stand and be recognized. And so I have a personal vendetta that compels me to want to get recognition for them and what they did, and so it just drives me, and I have no idea where it's going to end, but I'm not going to stop working on it.
Yeah, no, and I hope, you know, and I hope that you are able to achieve that. We've got the information there for you on the screen. It's called The Bitch Wall, The Vietnam Wailing Wall. It's by Dennis Lane. It's available via Amazon, Left Book Banks right here in town. And of course, you can follow Dennis and people who've been writing about the book, reviewing it on the website. And if you want to reach out for a variety of reasons, the email address is right there for you on the screen. I wish we had more time because there's just so much to talk about, and I know there's just so much too on the website that really gives you such a window into what you experience. But thank you for coming here today, and thank you for your time.
I enjoyed it.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you at home for watching, and please keep it here on STL TV. Experience St. Louis.